Welcome back, Tolkien Fanatics, to the third episode on the Match Play Guide Scenario Review Series. So far I have talked about a scenario from pools 2 and 4, the hold objective and kill the enemy scenarios, those being domination and to the death respectively. And today I'm moving on to the third pool to talk about our third scenario, and it is actually going to be pool 5, and the scenario I have chosen is Reconnoiter, which is also scenario 5. So pool 5 and scenario 5 for Reconnoiter. So this is a scenario that I personally really like. I know a lot of fans or a lot of players aren't a big fan of it, especially from a tournament competitive play setting. It's not a very good scenario for competition for competition, but for events. There we go. Couldn't think of a stupid word. Wow, even with little notes in front of me, I can't think of the word. Anyway, it's not always a very good scenario for events, especially competitive events. Now, more laid back, let's just get together and do like 600 point practice day events, that kind of stuff, where everybody does round robin and plays each other. It's probably very good for it. But for true, nose to the grindstone, I'm going there to try and win or place as high as I can. Reconnoiter is not a very popular scenario for these events, just due to the fact that it does take a long time to play, and it usually doesn't ever finish naturally in a, we'll say, 2-hour time limit. Because right now the game is kind of in that 700 to 800 point phase, with it mostly leaning towards the 800 point, which is kind of high in my opinion. I liked it better around the 750, 700. But at 800 points, Reconnoiter is usually a scenario that never gets finished in a 2-hour time limit for a tournament. Even at a 2-hour and 15-minute time limit, because I had that for the event I did. Actually, I had 2.5 hour for the event I did in February, Great Battle of Carolinas, and it still didn't. Most of them still didn't finish. So, let's go ahead and talk about this scenario. So, starting positions, actually both players' models are not on the board at the beginning of the game. They come in through a special reinforcements roll, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it is a normal, roll. Whoever gets higher gets to pick board side, and then you go from there. So turn 1, nobody's on the board. It isn't until, end of deployment, nobody's on the board. You don't actually start getting folks on the board until the end of turn 1. And that follows the special reinforcement rule I just talked about. So at the end of your move phase, roll a d6 for each of your warbands that is not on the battlefield and consult the chart below. Warband's captain can use might to alter the roll. Models enter the board via the rules for reinforcements. See page 33 of the Middle Earth Strategy Battle Game Rules Manual. So they follow it, meaning that they come in from a singular point and move on, which, unlike a lot of folks don't realize, they'll just, all right, I'm just going to come in from right around here, and everybody moves in 6 inches. That's not true. You move in from a singular point. So if you measure everything from a singular point, you should end up actually with a curve. Is it a parabola? Yeah, let's say a parabola of, we'll say arc. That's a better word. An arc of your models. The most farthest forward, of course, being the leader of the warband itself, if you so choose to do it that way. But they're not all going to move in 6 inches, otherwise you're moving more. And I'm saying 6 inches here. Use your respective model's movement distance, obviously. If you're cavalry, you're 10. If you're like Maher scouts, you got 8. If you're hobbits, you're 4, so on and so forth. So the chart is pretty simple. For the first turn, 1 through 3, nobody comes on, but you get a +1 to roll next turn. So that means you're coming in on a 3-up, and then the turn after that a 2-up, and on the turn after that you come on, period. So this is again the reason why a lot of folks don't like this scenario, is because it can take you up to 4 turns to get your army fully on the board. And it kind of sucks, because the whole point of this scenario, the objective is to get across the board and off your opponent's board edge, while preventing your opponent from doing the same thing. Now, this is, again, another reason why people don't like this. It's a very long game because to move across the board takes 48 inches of movement. So even if you're doing that with 10-inch moving horses, you're talking about a minimum of 5 turns to move across the board. 10 inches, 4 foot is 48 inches. 48 divided by 10, 4.8. You're looking at least 5 turns to move off the board. And that's not including having to maneuver around terrain and combats and all other things. At a minimum, even with 10-inch movers, you're looking at 6 or 7 turns. And most match play events don't go past 8 turns at the very most. And that really hinders you, especially when you're talking about, again, not all your army might come, your whole army might not come on in first turn. In fact, it usually doesn't unless you're spending points of might, which you can do for this scenario in order to get them to come on. So some of the scoring, this is it's a 3-5-7. You're going to get points if you get more models off than your opponent, then you get the minimum amount. If you get double than your opponent, you get the middle amount, and if you get triple, you get the most. Then you have broken and leader wounds, and this is one where actually breaking your opponent and being unbroken is better than killing the leader. So if you can manage to break your opponent, which is something I usually actually look to try and do. Unfortunately, a lot of guys I practice and playtest against have like ass-kicking heroes for their leaders. So it's very, very hard unless you divert a lot of resources into trying to kill their leaders. So a lot of times I'll see if I can't just at least take them off their horse to mitigate their killing power. Again, going back to another video I talked about, I believe it was actually my To the Death scenario review that I did, where I talked about, if a major hero has 3 attacks, you put them on a horse, on a charge they get 4, they win, they get the knockdown, it becomes 8. Well, if you can keep them on foot, then they're only throwing at max 3 dice to try and kill you or wound you and to win the fight, which is really good. You really mitigate. You turn a potential 8 attacks down to 3. That's great. So that's something I'll look to do, is at least try and mitigate my heroes my opponent's leaders killing ability, but then I will definitely go for breaking. If you're an infantry based army, like you have a couple cav just for maybe like a vanguard or elite units to protect your hero who's mounted, or just to ride with them as a strike force or something like that, this is a scenario you freaking hate. So, and I pray that you have March in your army. So, again, I said it a couple times now. This is not a popular scenario that you will see because of the length of time it requires to actually obtain some of the victory conditions. But that being said, you still do see it. Like I said earlier, I again used this in February when I did my 1,000 point Great Battle of Carolinas event. Now, the one thing I did with this, and I think a lot of TOs sometimes are smart, or if they're not, maybe you guys, if you're a TO, should be writing this down in your little TO book right now. I made it my first scenario of the day because it was the morning scenario from 10 to 12:30, and then lunch was from 12:30 to 2. So I let everybody know before we even started. I said, guys, this round officially ends at 12:30. You have until 2 o'clock to return from lunch. We will start the second round at 2 o'clock. That being said, if you and your opponent are not done with your round at 12:30, I am willing to give you another half hour until 1 o'clock to finish your game. That being said, both players must agree with this. So I factored in the fact that this is a long-running scenario and made it so that it was my first scenario of the day. That way, folks kind of had that extra little bit of wiggle room time to work in there. And there were a number of games that continued on past that 2.5 hour mark. And I was okay with that because I had made that decision beforehand and made the public announcement to everybody beforehand that they could do so. So definitely make sure you practice this scenario. It's definitely one to practice for. Again, infantry-based armies, you're going to pray. I'm praying that you're smart enough to put in a captain or some named hero that has March, because the only way you're going to possibly sniff your opponent's board edge is if you march and then can do some heroic like slingshots with some foot guys and a hero to just get your models moving, 12 inches a turn or more. Again, if you're an 8-inch moving army, there are guys out there, goat riders, Mahers scouts, stuff like that. Then you can go ahead and get yourself across the board even quicker. But you could move 6 inches, charge a guy, have 2 guys in the fight, win the fight, kill the guy, have a heroic combat setup, move your hero into another guy, and then take maybe the second model and just throw it another 6 inches farther. So there's a way to move 12 inches in one turn. There's ways to mitigate it. Horde armies, definitely use your numbers to your advantage. You're going to have a hard time getting across because most Horde armies don't have cav or very much of it. I'm looking at the Shire for this one, Goblin Town, Ruffians. Those are, common Horde armies that really don't have any sort of cav ability to get across the field. So just use your massive amount of numbers and block it up so your opponent can't get through you. And then they're going to have a hard time breaking you because you should have massive numbers. So maybe you can break your opponent and score a minor victory for like a 3-0 win or something like that. Elite armies, I'm thinking more like all cav units. You can't just run your whole army off the board. Unfortunately, this game goes to being quartered. Models that have escaped off the board, they don't count as being... they don't count as being gone. They count as being on the board in regards to being broken. So if you run, I don't know, you got 24 models, you run 10 of them off the board or 12 of them off the board, you can never be broken then, which means you can never be quartered. So you can never get the game to end your own way. I mean, there's abilities where you can end a game. I've done it before. I have stabbed myself to death with a lower fight value army just to purposely break myself when I had the points advantage. It was for this scenario specifically. I had 2 guys off the board, so my opponent's 1. He was in a position where if we went another turn, then he was going to run 2 more guys and have 3-2, and I stabbed myself to 25%. And I got a few lucky dice rolls where it mattered. Rolled low when it came to winning the fight, but then rolled high for stabs to kill myself, and was able to 25 and quarter myself. Well, that's the same thing. But anyway, I was able to quarter myself and end the game and end up with a major victory because I had, 5 victory points to my opponent's, I think, 1. I think he wounded my leader in that scenario. I can't remember exactly. Or no, he was broken 5-3 because I was broken. He wasn't. I hadn't broken him. But I still pulled a major victory, or I'm sorry, a minor victory. And a victory is a victory, let's be honest. So yeah, that's pretty much everything I can think of. You just kind of got to use terrain to your advantage for movement or blocking. And it's a scenario, like I said, you don't see it a lot, but don't ignore it. Have a game plan. There are other movement-based scenarios. We will talk about it. Pool 5 is the maneuvering scenarios. There are 2 others that are very large movement-based scenarios, and we will talk about those in the upcoming series videos. And there are other, scenarios that also require a lot of movement. Like I said last time, To the Death, in my opinion, is one that does require a lot of movement due to the fact that you're starting 24 inches apart. And if you are a shooting base or going against a shooting heavy army, you don't want to sit there and get shot to death while you're trying to move 6 or 8 or 10 inches at a time across the board, and your opponent just sits there and pings you. So definitely have a way to get some fast movement in your army. Be it, multiple cav, a vanguard cav, marches. Definitely look at marches because I've been looking at a lot of horde armies or semi-horde armies myself lately, and definitely looking at getting, multiple models I can call march. So I can do it at least, 2, 3, 4 times a game, if not more, when and where I need to do it. So, yep. All right, guys, that wraps up Scenario 5 from Pool 5, Reconnoiter. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys are enjoying this series. Please hit that like, share, subscribe button to help me beat those damn YouTube analytics. And I look forward to seeing you next time in a Tolkien Fanatic adventure. Take care.